What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Face Off Sports Network News Desk. And we do have some news pertaining to Jamar Chase and the Cincinnati Bengals per NFL Network's Tom Pelissero. Jamar Chase, the all-world receiver, has finally made his NFL preseason training camp practice debut on Sunday as he returns to practice for the first time. Now, there is no word on movement for a new contract. We are roughly 2 weeks away from the start of the regular season, and the clock is ticking for players like Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and Brandon Ayuk to get on the field. This is the first domino to fall, and this is the perfect time because while we've been drafting fantasy football teams all off season long, we are in the heart of fantasy draft season. The regular players, the fair weather players, the bulk of the fantasy players are doing their drafts in the coming days and the coming weeks leading up to the regular season. And now that we know Jamar Chase is going to be playing with the Cincinnati Bengals, we can continue to draft him early first round. Right now, using FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship ADP, Jamar Chase is the sixth player off the board. Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek, Lamb, Bijan, Breece, Chase. Now that we know that Chase is going to be there, he's returned with enough time to shake off the rust, get into some football shape, practice with Burrow in the offense. We could see Jamar Chase's ADP jump up a few spots. Maybe he jumps into the top 3 again. Is there a case to be made that Jamar Chase could finish as the number 1 overall wide receiver in PPR leagues for fantasy football? I think there is a case to be made. Obviously, the sure things, if you want to call it a sure thing bet, would be guys like CeeDee Lamb, should he return, guys like Tyreek Hill, who both are going with the number 1 overall pick, if not CMC. But I do think there is a path for Jamar Chase to get there. What do we know? Well, the Cincinnati Bengals last year, they were 4th in terms of pass percentage. They passed on 66.3% of the plays. This is a year that T. Higgins in the lineup. Joe Burrow missed a lot of time. So even with backup quarterbacks, Zach Taylor's going to throw the football, and they lost Brian Callahan, but they promoted their offensive coordinator, Dan Pitcher, from within. In fact, he's been with the Cincinnati Bengals organization, I believe, for over 8 years. So he predates Zach Taylor and his guys. So we're going to see a very similar pass run ratio. This is going to be a very pass happy football team, especially noting that Joe Mixon is not there anymore. And they're going to have to rely on Chase Brown, who we really don't know a lot of, and Zach Moss, who I believe is a little bit overrated coming from Indy, where he did flourish. But since he's a downgraded offensive line, I think Joe Mixon is going to be a big loss. He was one of the more reliable running backs in the NFL in terms of moving the chains. So expect another pass-heavy year from Cincinnati, which correlates to more fantasy production for Jamar Chase. Now let's get to Jamar Chase. Last year, Jamar Chase was a fantasy disappointment compared to where he was being drafted in the top 5 or better in PPR fantasy drafts. Jamar Chase, wide receiver 11 in PPR, wide receiver 11 in points per game. He has this type of a finish, which is a career low finish, past 2 years leading up to 2023, his first 2 years in the NFL, wide receiver 4 in points per game, wide receiver 5 in points per game. Last year, career high in targets, career high in receptions, second most receiving yards, but a career low in touchdowns. So let's look into it. Last season, Jamar Chase lined up in the slot 25.8% of the time. That is a career high for Jamar Chase. Maybe they moved him into the slot in games where Joe Burrow didn't play to give the young quarterback a safety blanket. Maybe he moved in there in games that Tyler Boyd may have missed last season. With Tyler Boyd no longer on this team, you can make the case, and I get that they have some nice young receivers like Ioshevis, who is expected to open the year as the number 3, Trenton Irwin, Jermaine Burton, Mike Gesicki playing the big slot role. You can make a case that we're going to see a similar year out of Jamar Chase lining up in the slot, maybe moving him around a little bit more in the formation, which again correlates to additional targets. Now, Jamar Chase also brings it in the red zone. He was 8th amongst wide receiver and red zone targets, but only 26 in deep targets. I think with Joe Burrow being out for about 7 games last year, that did affect the big playability from Jamar Chase. Joe Burrow looks good. There's no reports of any injury from Joe Burrow. In fact, Joe Burrow could be a big-time fantasy value according to his ADP. If we can get a healthy year out of Joe Burrow, and this team's going to be a top 5 team in the NFL in throwing the football, which they should be, again, missing Joe Mixon. Defense going to be good, not great. They're going to have to throw to win and throw to keep themselves in football games. If we can get a healthy season out of Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, there is certainly a case to be made that Jamar Chase pops and finishes as the overall number 1 wide receiver. So if you're doing your fantasy drafts, don't be afraid to draft Jamar Chase. He's going to play. He's in practice. He doesn't have a new deal. We don't have to worry about that anymore. The biggest concern for Jamar Chase is the health of Joe Burrow, and we shouldn't fade Jamar Chase because we're afraid of Joe Burrow getting hurt. Because if these two guys are on the field together, we've seen it in the past, magical things happen. Again, you go to the 2 years previous to 2023, Chase was a wide receiver 4 and 5 in points per game. Now he is in his prime. This team's going to be even more Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow reliant. I think we could have a career season for Jamar Chase in 2024. I'm Anthony Servino. This is the Face Off Sports Network. We'll see you later.